Hi folks, Harry here, and today I'm going to be telling you, in my opinion, the top 10 scariest Stephen King books. So initially I wanted to make this video a top 5 list, but there are so many scary Stephen King books out there, I struggled to leave some of them out. So I'm just going to get right into the video and give you my top 10 scariest Stephen King books. Before we get into the video though, the question of the day is, what do you think is the scariest Stephen King book? Let me know in the comments down below. So at number 10, I'm putting Stephen King's newest release, Later. Stephen King's latest novel packed quite a punch. I think it's partially because this book massively connects to one of Stephen King's most famous books, which is one of his scariest books. I'm not going to mention what that book is because it's kind of a spoiler, but it does connect to one of his scariest books, and I think that the way that it does connect is very, very creepy. But also just the whole concept of the main character seeing dead people. Like, have you ever seen The Sixth Sense? That's terrifying. So yeah, Later takes the number 10 spot. Hi guys, I just quickly want to shout out two brilliant up-and-coming channels. The first one is Yasmin from Yazian Books. She makes brilliant videos, mostly about Stephen King, so I highly recommend checking out her videos. And the other one is Bookish Drummer, who sometimes also makes videos about Stephen King. I highly recommend that you check out his videos too. Also, if you want to see videos trickled in with some amazing drumming. So at number 9 is Night Shift. So this was Stephen King's first short story collection, and I think it has 20, maybe 21 short stories in it. And the vast majority of them are terrifying. I have to say, I'm not a massive fan of Stephen King's short stories, I'm just not a fan of short stories in general, but this is my favourite short story collection of his. So this book has so many terrifying short stories. The ones that are coming to mind are Graveyard Shift, Grey Matter, The Mangler, The Boogeyman. There are so many great ones in here. Actually, my 3 favourites are Graveyard Shift, Strawberry Spring, and I Know What You Need, but the last 2 are not scary. But this is just a great collection of short stories. And the vast majority of them are pretty damn terrifying, so I would recommend this one. So next up is actually one of my least favourite Stephen King books, and that is Bag of Bones. So this 600-page novel follows a writer, of course it's a Stephen King book, whose wife unexpectedly dies, and he gets hit with a really extreme case of writer's block. And he goes to this lake house where really creepy things happen. I wasn't a massive fan of this book because it was just really slow, I didn't really like any of the characters, mainly it was just really slow. But something I can't deny is that this book is absolutely terrifying. There's a lot of stuff with ghosts because it's a classic ghost story, but there's also loads of stuff with like grief and death, and it's just heartbreaking at the same time. But at the end of the day, it is a horror story at heart, and it is just petrifying. There's another book that's going to be later on this list that also massively touches on grief and death, and I think Stephen King absolutely aces that. He's brilliant at it. And even though I don't like this book, I can definitely see that Bag of Bones succeeds in being terrifying based on the themes of grief. So at number 7 is possibly one of the most underrated Stephen King books, and that is Geralds Game. So this book follows a middle-aged couple whose relationship is kind of dying out. There's no extra flair. And they go to this cabin where they try to spice up their sex game, but something goes very wrong. This book is so scary because it's got a massive sense of helplessness. The main character, the whole book you're just thinking, how the hell does she survive? How does she survive? How does she get through this horrible situation? And this book is just filled with never-ending suspense. I have to say though, one negative thing about this book is that there is a lot of sexual violence and child abuse, which does make it terrifying in all of the wrong ways. Like, Stephen King's books are enjoyably terrifying, this one's just a little bit disgustingly terrifying, but this book also has the most disgusting scene I've ever read, in a good way. It made me feel sick, and I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. So I wouldn't recommend this if you're easily triggered by sexual violence, but if you just want a really terrifying Stephen King book that's very quick to read, you've got to read Gerald's Game. It's fantastic. So at the number 6 spot is Dr. Sleep. So this is the sequel to The Shining, which I'm sure you will guess is later on this list. But I don't find Dr. Sleep nearly as scary as The Shining, but I do still find this book pretty terrifying, and it's for one reason. Well, 2 reasons. First of all, the villains in this book, the True Knot, are terrifying because they literally suck steam, which is the physical embodiment of The Shining, out of psychic kids, and kill them and eat them, which is just petrifying in general. But also there is one scene which does involve the True Knot in this book where they brutally murder a little boy. and is scarring. I remember seeing the movie adaptation of this in the cinema when it first came out and actually feeling sick to my stomach because I had read it, and the whole time while I was in the cinema watching the movie I was just dreading this scene coming up. And they did a brilliant job adapting it because Mike Flanagan is a genius, just like with Geralds Game, but this scene just scarred me for life. So this book is pretty high on this list just because of that one scene alone. So getting into the top 5 now, we're getting serious. Number 5 is a book that I really don't like, and it's Rose Madder. The first 200 pages of this book I love. I would rate it 6 stars if I could. I love the first 200 pages, but the last 400 pages is where this book really falls flat for me. I just really didn't like it. So I think I gave this book 2 stars just because the last 400 pages were such a drag. I know quite a few people who love this book, so if you're watching, please do not get offended. We're still friends, yeah. But again, this book does have a lot of domestic and sexual violence, which is just uncomfortable to read. But Norman Daniels, the antagonist, is so scary because he's a dirty cop. He's a police officer who is abusive to his wife, and his wife cannot report this abuse to the police because he is the police, and he's an unescapable villain, which just makes him that much more terrifying. If you've watched my favourite Stephen King villains video, which I will link a card to up here, I say that my favourite Stephen King villains are the human villains, because everything they do is purely out of choice rather than a supernatural force driving them to do these things. So that's why I hate Norman Daniels, and that's why I'm terrified of him. So taking the number 4 spot is possibly one that you might put at your number 1 spot, and that is Pet Sematary. So Pet Sematary to me is scary in the same way that Bag of Bones is scary, in the way that it deals with grief and death in such a heartbreaking and terrifying and realistic and raw way. I think this is the best example of Stephen King using verisimilitude in his writing, in the way that it just feels so honest and real and authentic and gritty. Stephen King does not hold back from any details in this book. He just gives it to you as it is. And that's what makes it scary. Obviously, the stuff with the burial ground and the zombie pets and kids, like obviously, yeah, that's scary, but it's just the whole grief aspect that really gets me. Okay, so getting into the top 3 now. These are some of the scariest books that I've ever read. Number 3 is Salem's Lot. And now I highly regret using this light because these covers reflect the light really badly. Salem's Lot is a classic vampire gothic horror novel. Gothic horror is my favourite subgenre of horror, and it's just my favourite genre of anything in general. So I'm kind of inclined to love this sort of thing, but it's really scary because the villains in it are vampires, but they're not like Anne Rice style point of view vampire characters, but they're also not like Edward Cullen / Damon Salvatore type romanticized, sexualized vampires. These are just the gritty, evil, dark vampires who only want to kill and convert. And that's what's terrifying about this book. Stephen King also utilises his talent to once again create a small town environment. I absolutely love Stephen King's books where small towns get destroyed by a person or a group of people, kind of like Needful Things. And I think this is actually the first example of that in a Stephen King work, and it works very well. And this book is just generally very scary. Alright, top 2. I promise you this one's going to be on the list. It's The Shining. Again, The Shining is gothic horror, which many people don't really class it as that, but it is definitely gothic horror. And it's just a classic ghost tale. But to me, I don't think that the scariest thing about this book is the ghosts or the hedge animals. Yes, they're scary, but that's not the scariest thing about this book. I think the scariest thing about this book is the family aspect and how Jack is dealing with alcoholism and his psyche is slowly deteriorating. I absolutely love that in literature. But it's just so heartbreaking at the same time to see Jack go from a loving father and husband to a psychotic mess. So in a way this book is really sad, but also in a way this book is so scary. And just in addition to that, obviously the ghosts, the hedge animals, the everything, this book is just really scary, and I absolutely love it because of that. If anyone was to ask me which Stephen King book scared you the most, I would probably answer with The Shining. There is one book above this, of course, but I would say The Shining has psychologically affected me more than any other Stephen King book. Okay, so for my number 1 spot, I'm going to have you guess what you think it is in the comments down below. Quickly pause this video, comment what you think the number 1 spot is, and then unpause it. Don't cheat. Okay, so my number 1 spot, I'm sure you guessed it, it's It. So It is definitely Stephen King's most famous book, and I do actually believe that this book is massively misrepresented because it's often just labelled as a straight horror novel, but I think this book is actually more focused on friendships and the bonds that you make when you're a kid. The reason why It is so scary is because the antagonist is able to shapeshift into the thing in this world that scares you the most. Which means that if any human on the planet was in this book, they would be scared by it, because it can shapeshift into the thing that scares them the most, meaning that they would be scared. And anyone reading this book would be scared. Because it shapeshifts into so many things, you're very, very likely to be scared of one of them. And because his main form is a clown, most people are scared of clowns. Well, normal people are scared of clowns. If you're not scared of clowns, I don't know how to help you. To me, it is so scary because it has the ability to scare anyone on the planet. And for me, I think this is like the definitive horror novel. Not many books and not many authors are able to achieve the level of horror that It does. So to me, nothing can really beat It. I think this is the scariest book in the world. Okay, so those are, in my opinion, the 10 scariest Stephen King books. Again, let me know in the comments down below what you think the scariest Stephen King book is. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big fat thumbs up, and please consider subscribing for more bookish content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below, and I will see you next time with another video. Goodbye.